Was sitting in the gravel turnaround behind Holcomb's Diner on Route 9, finishing a cup of coffee I didn't really want, when my phone went off in the cup holder. The number had a 207 area code, local, but it wasn't anyone in my contacts. I almost let it ring out. I've thought about that a lot since. About the half second where I almost just dropped it back in the cup holder and pulled out onto the road. The voice on the other end was a man, mid-40s maybe, talking a little fast, a little quiet, like he didn't want to be overheard even though he was clearly alone. "Is this Mr. Pelletier?" "It is." "Sir, my name's Wendell Tasker. I'm the contractor you hired to redo the floor in the sewing room, the one out back of the house." "Right, sure. Sir, I need you to come on home, right now if you can. And I'm gonna ask you something and I don't mean any offense by it, but please come by yourself. Don't bring anybody with you. Don't call anybody on the way." I remember the light that morning. Late October in central Maine, that sharp-angled light that comes in low across the cornfields after the harvest, everything gone golden dry. I'd been about to drive out to my brother's place in Skowhegan. We were supposed to look at a used truck he was thinking about buying. Just a Saturday errand, the kind of small ordinary thing you don't even remember a week later. I told Wendell I'd be there in 15 minutes. He said thank you, sir, and hung up. My name is Arlen Pelletier. I'm 63 years old. I live on a country road outside Pittsfield, Maine, in a farmhouse that's been in my family 3 generations. My wife passed in the spring of last year. 13 months before that phone call. She was 59. The cardiologist at Eastern Maine Medical said it was an arrhythmia that progressed faster than anyone caught. He used the phrase, "atypical presentation," twice in our conversation, and I remember nodding like I understood, which I didn't. We'd been married 34 years. My wife, her name was Marguerite, but I called her Maggie since the day I met her at a church potluck in 1989. She was a quilter, serious about it. She had a sewing room in a small addition off the back of the house, originally a sun porch my father built in the late 70s that she had insulated and finished out herself. A little at a time over about 2 years right after we got married. She had her long arm machine in there and a cutting table she'd built from an old door, and bolts of fabric stacked along one wall like a fabric store. The floor in that room had always been a problem. The subfloor was bowed from a slow leak we'd fixed in the 90s, and Maggie had put down pine boards over it that creaked something fierce. After she passed, I'd promised myself I'd fix it up. I waited a year because I couldn't bring myself to touch any of her things. And then I called Wendell Tasker on a Tuesday in October because a guy at the hardware store in town said Wendell was honest and didn't charge by the hour. I'd given him a key on the Thursday before. Told him to work the weekend if the weather held. I hadn't planned on being there. I planned on being out at my brother's, looking at a truck I didn't need to look at. Killing a Saturday because Saturdays without Maggie were still hard to fill. When I pulled into the driveway, Wendell was standing on the side porch with his hands jammed in the pockets of his Carhartt jacket. He was a big man, gray in his beard. The kind of guy who carries his weight without it slowing him down. He didn't smile when I got out of the truck. He just nodded once and waited for me to come up to him. "I want to show you something before I say what I'm thinking," he said. "I'd rather you just look at it first." He took me through the kitchen and out to the sewing room. He'd pulled up about a third of the pine board flooring along the north wall, and I could see down to the joists. The subfloor was already up in one section, and there, set into the cavity between 2 joists, resting on a little wooden shelf that somebody had clearly built and screwed in flush with the framing, was a flat, metal cash box. The kind you'd buy at Rennie's for $15. Gray. Combination dial on the front. "It's not just down there loose," Wendell said. "Somebody made a place for it. They cut the subfloor clean, built that shelf, and put it in there on purpose. I haven't touched it. Figured that wasn't my business." I stood there a long minute. I could hear the furnace kick on inside the house. "The combination," I said, and I knew it before I finished the sentence. Maggie used the same 4 digits for everything that needed a code. The month and day our daughter was born. I knelt down on the bare subfloor and worked the dial. The latch popped on the first try. Inside there was a thumb drive, a small spiral notebook with a green cardboard cover, the kind they sell at the dollar store, and underneath both of those an envelope with my name on the front. Maggie's handwriting. The careful, slightly slanted print she used when she wanted something to look official. I sat down right there on the joists. I don't know how long I sat. Wendell didn't say anything. After a while, I heard him go back out to the porch and close the door behind him, gentle, like a man who knew when not to be in a room. I didn't open the envelope that morning. I want to be honest about that. I sat with it on the kitchen table for maybe 2 hours before I touched any of it. I made a pot of coffee. I drank the coffee. I looked at the box and the notebook and the thumb drive in the envelope, and I tried to make a story in my head that explained why my wife would have built a hiding place under our sewing room floor and then died without telling me about it. She wouldn't have done that without a reason. Maggie didn't do anything without a reason. That was the thing that scared me, sitting there at the table. Whatever was in that box, she had wanted me to find it. But not by accident. Not soon. Not while she was still alive to see the look on my face. I started with the notebook. Her handwriting was small and even. The first entry was dated almost 2 years before she died. The pages were a record. She'd been keeping notes on things she'd noticed in our finances. The first thing she'd noticed was a wire transfer of $14,000 out of our brokerage account, listed in the statement as Fee Adjustment Managed Account Services. She'd called our financial planner, a man named Crawford Sennett, who'd handled our retirement money for 9 years. Crawford had told her over the phone that it was a portfolio rebalancing charge that had been part of our original management agreement and that she shouldn't worry about it. He told her he'd be glad to send her a copy of the relevant page from the contract. The next entry, 2 weeks later, page he sent me has a Section 4B about discretionary withdrawals. My copy of the contract doesn't have a Section 4B. My copy goes straight from 4A to 5. I checked twice. I'm going to ask him to mail me a full copy of his version so I can compare. I had to put the notebook down at that point. I went upstairs to the spare bedroom where we kept the file cabinet. We were organized people, Maggie and me, the kind who kept tax returns going back 20 years in labeled folders. I pulled out the file marked SEN Eddie Tess W. Althmanagaman and found the original contract from 2015. I sat on the bed and read it through. Section 4A was about account access. Section 5 was about reporting. There was no 4B. The pagination jumped from page 6 to page 8. I'd signed the thing without ever counting the pages. Maggie had counted them. Almost 2 years before she died, she'd counted them. I went back downstairs and kept reading. Over the months that followed, she'd documented 11 more withdrawals. They ranged from about $3,000 to $19,000, spread out over a year and a half, each one labeled in the statements with some piece of jargon: advisory adjustment, discretionary rebalancing, managed services fee. Total, by her count, was right around $112,000. That alone would have been enough to flatten me. We weren't rich people. That was retirement money. That was the money we'd talked about using for a camp on Moosehead Lake. That was a chunk of the future Maggie had been saving for, and somebody had been quietly siphoning it. But it wasn't the part of the notebook that made me stop breathing. About halfway through, the tone of the entry shifted. She'd started feeling sick. Just little things at first. She wrote about being out of breath walking up the stairs. About her pulse feeling like it was skipping. About a kind of bone-deep tiredness she couldn't shake. She'd gone to our family doctor, a woman over in Newport named Dr. Anita Choksey, who'd run blood work and an EKG, and told Maggie that her heart was showing some early signs of arrhythmia. Manageable, Dr. Choksey had said. Not unusual for a woman in her late 50s. She'd started Maggie on a low dose of a beta blocker and told her to come back in 3 months. The symptoms didn't improve. They got worse. And then, in the margin of one of those entries, Maggie had written something fast, the letters a little crooked, like she'd written it in a hurry or with shaking hands. The vitamins. When did I start taking them? Check the date. I remembered the vitamins. About 18 months before Maggie died, somebody had given her a gift, a wellness gift basket, the kind you see at the front of the pharmacy around the holidays, wrapped in cellophane with tea bags and dried lavender and a little box of soft gel capsules. She'd told me it was a heart health supplement, some kind of herbal thing the givers swore by. She'd taken 2 of those capsules every morning with breakfast. For 16 months, I could not, sitting at that kitchen table, remember who had given her the basket. 3 entries later in her even careful print, Maggie told me, the basket was from Crawford. He brought it to our review meeting in March, said his wife uses these herself, said they did wonders for her energy. I've been taking them every morning since. And then, a few entries after that, in the same crooked margin handwriting as before, I don't think I should keep taking them, but I need to be sure. If I throw them away now, I lose the evidence. If I'm wrong about this, I'm wrong about everything, and I've made an old man into a monster for no reason. I'm going to save the rest of the bottle. I'm going to find a way to test them. She'd been collecting evidence. My wife, by herself, while she was getting sicker by the week, had been quietly building a case against the man who was making her sick, and she hadn't told me. I turned to the last page of the notebook. The final entry was dated 9 days before she passed. I waited too long. I trusted the system. I should have gone to the State Attorney General's office 6 months ago. I'm too tired now to do what needs doing. Arlen will find us when the floor gets fixed. I know he'll get to it eventually. He's been talking about that floor for 10 years. I love him more than I have ever known how to say. I am so sorry I didn't tell him. I was trying to spare him something I wasn't even sure of yet. I wasn't wrong. I sat at the kitchen table for a long time after that. The coffee in my cup had gone cold and a skin had formed on top of it. The October light through the window over the sink had moved across the table and was sitting on my hand. Then I picked up the thumb drive. I don't keep a computer in the house anymore. I gave my old laptop to my daughter Briette when I retired from the mill. So I put the thumb drive and the notebook and the envelope into a paper grocery bag, and I drove the 25 minutes over to Briette's place in Waterville. Briette is 36. She works as a school nurse at the regional high school. She has 2 kids, my grandsons, who were out at soccer practice when I pulled in. I told her I needed to borrow her laptop for a couple of hours, that it was about her mother's estate. She has carried a quiet kind of worry since Maggie died, and she heard something in my voice. She asked me what was going on. I told her I didn't know yet. I told her I'd tell her when I knew, but that I needed her to give me a few hours first. She set me up at her kitchen table with her laptop and a fresh cup of coffee, and she went back to folding laundry in the living room and pretending she wasn't watching me through the doorway. The thumb drive had 2 things on it: a folder of scanned documents, bank statements, the original contract, 2 versions of the contract, side by side with the differences circled in red, an email thread between Maggie and Crawford Sennett, and 1 audio file, 43 minutes long, recorded, according to the file properties, about 5 months before Maggie passed. I put on a pair of Briette's earbuds and listened to the whole thing. It was Maggie, sitting across from Crawford in his office. I could tell from the ambient sound, the same office I'd been in 2 or 3 times myself over the years, on Main Street in Pittsfield, above the insurance agency. She'd recorded the conversation on her phone. He didn't know. I want to be careful about how I describe what was on that recording. He never confessed to anything outright. Crawford Sennett was too smooth for that. But the way he handled her questions was not the way an innocent man handles being asked an honest question. She laid out the missing pages. He told her the pagination must have been a printing error. She laid out the list of withdrawals. He told her that was just how managed accounts worked, and that maybe it was time he sat down with me and walked us both through the basics again. He used the phrase, the basics, twice. He told her, in a kind voice, that financial matters were complicated, and that if she was feeling overwhelmed, she should let him work it out with her husband. He told her that the symptoms she was describing, the fatigue, the brain fog, could affect a person's ability to read documents accurately. He suggested she talk to her doctor about whether she was overdoing it, and then, near the end, Maggie said this: "Crawford, I had one of the capsules from that gift basket tested at a lab in Portland. I want you to know that I did that. I'm not accusing you of anything. I just want you to know." There was a silence on the recording. I counted it. 5 seconds. Then Crawford said, very quietly, "Marguerite, you should be careful about what you say to people. Things like that, said out loud, can ruin a man." She said, "I'm not saying it out loud. I'm saying it to you." He said, "I think you should talk to your doctor. I'm worried about you. I really am." And then the recording ended. 5 seconds of dead air. That was his response to being told the capsules had been tested. Not surprise, not confusion, not a friendly laugh, and a "what on earth are you talking about?" 5 seconds of him doing math, and then a pivot to making her sound crazy. I sat in my daughter's kitchen with the earbuds still in, and the audio file ended and the cursor blinking on her screen, and I felt something I want to try to describe accurately. It wasn't rage. I'd expected rage. What it was a very quiet and very deliberate kind of clarity, like a window opening, like the moment in the morning when the fog burns off the field, and you can finally see all the way to the tree line. I drove home from Briette slow and careful. I did not tell her what was on the drive. Not yet. I needed to do one more thing first. When I got back to the house, I opened the envelope. 2 pages, handwritten, both sides. I'm not going to share most of what was on those pages, because some of it was the kind of thing a woman writes to her husband of 34 years when she suspects she might be running out of time, and that belongs to me. But there were 3 things in that letter that mattered to what came next. The first, I had the capsules tested at a private lab. The technician told me there were trace amounts of something she could not fully identify without more sophisticated equipment. She said it looked like a cardiac compound, but she could not be sure. I was going to take it to a toxicologist at the medical school in Bangor. I didn't have the strength. The second, the rest of the bottle is in the cedar chest at the foot of our bed, in the false bottom your father built. The capsules are in a small Ziploc inside a quilted pouch with a daisy on it. Please take them to a real toxicologist, not to Crawford. Not to anyone Crawford knows, not to the local police until you have evidence in hand. The third, and this is the line I have come back to most often, and the one I had the hardest time absorbing, Arlen. Please do not go to Crawford alone. Please. He is not who we thought he was. And I am almost certain he is not working alone. I found the false bottom of the cedar chest exactly where she said it would be. My father, who'd built it as a wedding gift to her, had put a sliding panel under the cedar lining that I never knew was there. The quilted pouch with the daisy was inside. The bottle of capsules was inside the pouch. There were 41 capsules left. I did not go to Crawford. I want to say that plainly, because I had the urge. I had the burning red urge of a man whose wife has been taken from him to drive into town on a Monday morning and walk into Crawford Senate's office on Main Street and put the bottle on his desk and sit down across from him and not say a word and see what he did. I have thought since about how much I am glad I didn't. Instead, I called a lawyer. A woman named Theodora Brockway out of Bangor, who I'd met once at my brother-in-law's funeral and who'd given me her card and told me to call her if I ever needed anything. I called her on Sunday evening and told her everything. The whole thing, start to finish, the contract and the withdrawals and the basket and the notebook and the recording and the capsules in the cedar chest. She listened for nearly an hour without interrupting once. When I finished, she said, "Arlen, I need you to bring me everything in that box. I need you to bring me the capsules. I need you not to contact Crawford Senate under any circumstance. And I need you not to tell anyone except your daughter. Do you understand me?" I said yes. I drove up to Bangor the next morning. Theodora moved faster than I'd have thought possible. Within 2 weeks, she'd brought in a detective from the state police's financial crimes unit, a man named Sergeant Marcus Loudon, who took the evidence and arranged for the capsules to be tested at the state forensic lab. Sergeant Loudon was a careful, soft-spoken man who reminded me in his quietness of Wendell Tasker. He listened to the audio recording 3 times in front of me. After the 3rd time, he said, "Mr. Pelletier, you understand we have a lot of work to do, but I want you to know what your wife did, the record she kept, the way she did it. I have rarely seen anything that careful from a trained investigator. I want you to know that." The forensic lab came back 9 weeks later. The capsules contained 2 compounds. The first was a low dose of a common herbal extract. The cover story, basically, what the bottle was supposed to be. The second was a measurable amount of a cardiac glycoside. The technical name doesn't matter. It's a compound derived from a flowering plant, used in tiny precise doses to treat certain heart conditions and very dangerous in unregulated amounts over long periods. Taken every morning for 16 months, in a person with no underlying heart condition, it would produce exactly the kind of arrhythmia my wife had developed. The kind that, to a country GP running a standard EKG, looks like cardiac disease developing naturally in a woman in her late 50s. Maggie had been poisoned, slowly, deliberately, for 16 months. Crawford Senate was arrested on a Tuesday morning in March, about 5 months after I found the box under the floor. The charges were fraud, theft over $10,000, and after a much longer investigation, manslaughter. The district attorney told Theodora that the manslaughter charge would be hard to land, that the chain of causation, while morally clear, was legally complicated, and that a jury might not go for it. I understood. I had begun to understand by then that the process of justice and the experience of justice are not always the same thing, and that they can each exist without the other being whole. What the investigation also turned up, and this is the part I have had the hardest time carrying, is that Crawford had not been alone. Maggie's older sister, my sister-in-law, had been in trouble for a long time. Her husband had walked out in 2019 and left her with 2 mortgages and a credit card balance that wouldn't quit. She had come to Maggie and me twice in those years asking for help, and we'd given her what we could afford to give. We hadn't known the rest. We hadn't known about the second equity loan she'd taken out on her house, or about the account she'd opened in her ex-husband's name without telling anyone, or about the money she owed to some men she'd met through a church friend who turned out not to be a church friend, Sergeant Loudon walked me through it in his office, in the same gentle way a doctor tells you something you don't want to know. Over the course of about 2 years, my sister-in-law had received 11 deposits into a checking account she'd opened at a credit union we didn't share. Small amounts, $1,200, $2,800. The deposits traced back through a series of transfers to an account in the name of Crawford Sennett's daughter-in-law. She'd told Crawford about our retirement accounts. She'd told him what was in them, roughly, and that Maggie was the one who watched the books, and that Maggie was the kind of person who would notice if something was off, but who would also keep it to herself for a long time before saying anything, because that was how Maggie was. She had given him the map. When Sergeant Loudon told me this, I had to ask him to stop talking for a minute. I sat in his office and looked at a framed photograph on his wall of a younger version of himself, holding up a striped bass on a dock somewhere. I looked at that fish for a long time. My sister-in-law swore to investigators that she hadn't known about the capsules. She said she'd thought Crawford was just going to skim some fees, that he'd told her Maggie would never notice and that there was plenty to go around. She said she'd needed the money, and she told herself a story about it being a loan she'd pay back someday, and she'd refused to look any further than that. She said she had loved her sister. I want to be careful about this part. I have known my sister-in-law for 34 years. She stood up at our wedding. She was at the hospital the night our daughter was born. She gave the eulogy at her own sister's funeral, and she cried so hard at the lectern that the pastor had to come up and finish reading her notes for her. I read in Maggie's notebook, near the end, a single line I almost missed the first time through, in the same crooked margin handwriting as the other late entries. I think she told someone about the accounts. I can't prove it. I can't tell Arlen. He loves her like a sister. If I'm wrong, it will break something in him that won't go back together. Wait until I'm sure. She had been protecting me. While she was dying, she had been protecting me from a truth she was not yet certain of, because she was afraid of what knowing the truth would cost me. My sister-in-law took a plea. She agreed to testify against Crawford in exchange for a reduced sentence. She is serving 38 months in a women's facility in southern Maine. She has written me 4 letters since she went in. I have not opened any of them. I keep them in a drawer in the kitchen, in a manila folder, and I look at the folder sometimes and I don't know yet what I'm going to do with them. I have stopped trying to force myself to know. Crawford Sennett was convicted on the fraud and the theft. The manslaughter charge was eventually pled down to reckless endangerment because of a problem with how the original capsules from Maggie's bottle had been stored before the state lab got them, a chain of custody issue that Theodora explained to me with great patience and that I understood with my head, but couldn't fully accept with the rest of me. He was sentenced to 15 years. With Maine's parole rules, he will serve at least 11 of them before he is eligible. I sat in the courtroom for the sentencing. I did not speak. Theodora had offered me the chance to give a victim impact statement, and I had thought about it for a long time, and in the end I had decided that I would not stand up and try to make a man like Crawford Sennett understand what he had taken from me. He would not have heard it. He would have nodded. I refused to give him my words. The civil suit, which Theodora pursued separately, recovered most of what had been taken, plus punitive damages. I gave a portion of that money to the cardiology unit at Eastern Maine. I gave another portion of it to a small legal aid clinic in Bangor that helps older folks who suspect they are being financially abused. It seemed like the right place for it to go. I still live in the house. Wendell Tasker came back the following spring and finished the floor. He did beautiful work. He wouldn't let me pay him for the second visit. He said he'd already been paid and that some jobs you finish because you started them, and that was the end of that conversation. The sewing room is mostly the way Maggie left it. Her long arm is still there. Her cutting table is still there. Her fabric is still stacked along the wall, though I've started, slowly, giving bolts a bit away to the quilting circle she belonged to at the Methodist church in town. Twice a month, they meet in the fellowship hall and make quilts for the Children's Hospital in Portland. I've started going to those meetings myself. I don't quilt. I cut pieces. I sweep up afterward. I bring a tin of cookies. The women have been kind to me. In the particular way Maine women are kind, which is to say, they have not made a fuss, and they have not asked too many questions, and they have made room at the table. There is a line in Maggie's letter that I come back to most often. She wrote, "You have always trusted people more easily than I have, and I have loved that about you. Don't let what happened make you stop. Just be willing, in the quiet moments, to look honestly at the people closest to you. The ones we have decided in advance are safe are usually the ones we are least willing to see." I've thought about that line many times, about the difference between suspicion, which is a sickness, and clear-eyed seeing, which is a kind of love, about how the people most capable of doing real harm to us are almost always the ones we have already decided not to question. About how my wife, in the last quiet year of her life, sat at her cutting table in the back room of our house, sick from the very thing the man across town had given her, and she did not let her fear stop her from writing things down. She wrote it down. She gathered the evidence. She put it in a metal box under a floor she knew her husband would one day get around to fixing. She left it for me to find. She trusted me to find it. That is the thing I keep coming back to. She knew me well enough after 34 years to know that I would eventually get around to that floor. She knew me well enough to know what I would do when I read what she had written. She did not write me a letter telling me to be careful, or telling me to be calm, or telling me what to do. She trusted me to figure it out. She left the evidence, and she trusted her husband to act on it. I think about her every day. I think about her at the kitchen table at the end of a long day, with her reading glasses pushed up on her head, writing in that small, careful handwriting. I think about her in the back room with the long arm humming, working on a baby quilt for a grandchild she would not live to meet. I think about her quietly putting a single capsule into a Ziploc bag, knowing what she suspected, knowing she did not yet have the strength to act, knowing she might not live to do this herself, refusing all the same to let it die with her. She was the most precise person I have ever known. She was also the bravest, and she trusted me, in the end, to be the kind of man who would not look away from what she had found. I have tried to be that man. I think she would say I have done all right. I think about cause and effect a lot now. The way my wife sat at her cutting table for almost 2 years writing down small numbers in a small notebook, while a man across town in a nice office handed her a basket wrapped in cellophane and called it a gift. Every single thing that happened after that, the missing pages in our contract, the slow loss in her chest, the floor I kept putting off, the morning Wendell Tasker called me from my own driveway, all of it followed from choices people made, mine included. Marguerite was sick because Crawford chose to make her sick. Crawford had the chance because my sister-in-law chose to tell him what we had. And I did not see any of it coming, because for 34 years I had decided, without ever saying it out loud, that the people inside our circle did not need to be looked at the way I looked at strangers. That is the thing I want anyone listening to this to hear. Trust is not a gift you hand someone once and never check on again. Real trust is a thing you tend to. The way Marguerite tended her quilts. The way she pulled out a stitch when something was off and started again. She was a precise woman because precision was how she loved people. She watched. She paid attention. She did not assume the people closest to her were safe just because they were close. The part of all this that has changed me the most is not the betrayal. It is the strength my wife showed when she was already running out of it. She was tired. She was scared. She was alone in her suspicion because she did not want to break my heart before she was certain. And she kept writing things down anyway. She wrote in shaky letters in the margins. She saved a single capsule. She built a hiding place under a floor she knew her husband would one day finally get around to fixing. That is what real courage looks like in an ordinary life. It is not loud. It is not dramatic. It is a woman with reading glasses pushed up on her head, putting one careful note after another into the dark, hoping the man she loves will find them. I am 63 years old. I do not have a lot of grand wisdom to leave anyone. But I will say this. Be willing to look at the people you have already decided are safe, not with suspicion, with clear eyes. That is a different thing. Suspicion poisons a life. Clear eyes protect one. And when something inside you whispers that a number on a statement does not add up, or a gift does not quite fit, or a person you have known forever is acting in a way you cannot name, write it down. Save the evidence. Take it seriously. You owe that much to the people who love you, and you owe it to yourself. Marguerite knew that. She paid for knowing it, and she trusted me in the end to be the kind of man who would finish what she started. That is the only inheritance that has mattered.